So now we know what variables are and how do we create them. So basically in the last video, we have talked about how to create a variable with the help of the data type and the value as well. Now, what are the other options we have? So we have worked with int, right? Do we have other options? So basically we have multiple data types to store your data. So let's talk about the first thing, which is data type. In fact, there are two categories of data type which we can normally work with. One is called primitive and the other one we'll keep it question mark. Okay, at this point we are not discussing about the second one. The first one is primitive. So basically in Java we have a lot of inbuilt data types available which you can use, and they are primitive. Now primitive simply means it is simple, basic to use, to work with. So whatever data you normally have, normally we work with numbers, we work with point values, we work with characters, we work with true or false. Now for that we have this category. So we can divide primitive into 4 categories here. The first one is of type integers. The second one we have is floating point value basically, so we can say float. And the third one is characters. And the fourth one is your boolean. Of course, when you divide this, we have more categories to it, but in general we have 4. We have integer, float, character, and boolean. Now when you say you want to store a range, a negative range to positive range, numbers, normal numbers or natural numbers you can say. In fact, we can call them as integer itself because we are starting with negative value. So that goes into integer. Whenever you have point values, that goes into float value. Whenever you go with characters like A, B, or any regional characters you have all across the world, that goes into character. And then when it comes to true and false, we go with boolean. Now inside integer itself, we have multiple subtypes to it. We have a concept of byte, we have short, we have int, and we have long. For float, we have another option which is of double, and then of course we have float. And then char is characters are characters. So in characters we can have different type of characters. In boolean, the only values we can have is true and false. Okay, so example, if I go back to my code and if I want to create a different variable, this time let's say float, so I can just come back here, I can remove this section, and here I can say this, we are creating a float value. Now how do we get a float value? So we can simply say float, and then we can have a value, let's say 7, or name to it, right? So name we can have is marks. Of course we don't put in marks, but let's go with marks. And then we can go with a value. Now floating point values will be having a dot, right? So we can say 6.5, something like this. So float marks equal to 6.5. That makes sense, right? Okay, cool. In the same way, we have also mentioned we have subtypes to integer. We can have a byte format. But why do we need all these extra formats? For that, let's understand some basic concept. Now basically when we talk about integers itself, so if we talk about integer, we have some sections to it. So integer will have different part. So integer will have different sizes. Example, if you want to store a normal number, so in general we always go with int, and int has its own value. Okay, so when you talk about int, the size of int is 4 bytes. So we can say 32 bits, and then it has a range to it. And you can find the range on the screen. We also have a format which is, let's say if you want to store a bigger value, a very big value. So in this case, I mean, of course, if a value goes beyond that range, we have to go for a long format. Now long supports 8 bytes. Now, of course, when you have more bytes, it will occupy more values and it will have a range. So of course you can find the range on the screen. Now, what if you want to store a smaller number? So of course, int provides you that range, but then what if you want to save memory? You don't want to go for int range. In that case, we can have a short value. Now short is only 2 bytes. So if you want to have a limited range, you can find the range on the screen. And then we have the next range, which is of byte. Now byte is only 1 byte. Okay, so 8 bits. And whatever you want to store, you can store in that. Of course, it has its own range. Now, how do we calculate this range? So we do with the help of, it goes from negative values, right? So it is minus 2 raised to 8 to plus 2 raised to 8 minus 1. Okay, so which is 2 raised to 8 is what? It is, oh, we're starting with negative value, right? So it is 2 raised to 7 and 2 raised to 7. And the range, so how do we calculate 2 raised to 7 is 128. So it starts from minus 128 to plus 127. So 128 minus 1, 127. That's how you can calculate the range for all the other numbers. And you can, of course, you have seen that on the screen. So this is how we can use integer. So which one to use? So if you want to get a variable which will have a value, let's say 5 or 6 or maximum 127, you can go for byte. Now how do we get that variable? It's very simple. You use a type which is byte. You specify a variable name, let's say num, and you assign a value which is 8 or any other value which you want. Of course, that should be in a range, and that's how you can store it. Now, what if you want to have a float value? Now, float actually gives you two different values or two different types. Now, it depends upon which programming language you have worked with before. Example, if you have ever worked with C, by default, we have a value which is float. So by default, we have float there. Now, float only takes 4 bytes and it has its own values you can store. And then we also have an option of double, which takes 8 bytes. Now, what do you think, which will be the default value? Think about it. Will it be float or double by default in Java? So default is actually double, not float. Okay. Now, why double is because, see, float are good when you have limited values, when you have limited precision, because after your point value, example, if you have a value which is 126.5678 or whatever values you have, so float will have a limited precision set here. But on the other hand, double will have a longer one. Right, so double can have more values. So whenever you perform scientific calculations or any kind of calculation, if you wanted to make it fast and it would support maximum precision, you can use double there, right? And by default, Java supports double. So if you want to create a variable which is with double, so you can simply say double, and you can create a variable name num is equal to, you can assign a value which is 5.6 or whatever value you want to assign. But how about float? Now, if you try that with float, it may not work. Example, if you say float, and if you say a variable name which is num, and equal to, so when you try to assign 5.6, it will give you error. It's because by default, the moment you say point values, it will be considered as double. And if you want to say, hey, I don't want to work with double, I want to work with float. So explicitly, you have to mention, hey, okay, this is actually double value. So this is actually a float value, so you can put a F there, right? So 5.6F, that's how you define it's a float value. For double, you don't have to mention that. Now, how about character? So when you work with character, and in other languages, character will have a less bits, but in Java, it goes for 2 bytes. So in other languages like C, you have only 1 byte. It's because it normally occupies the integer range. It normally occupies the character range, ASCII values. But then in Java, we thought, hey, can we just have all the characters in the world, not just English, all the other languages? So Java actually follows something called Unicode, not ASCII by default. It will support Unicode, and it has 2 bytes, which is 16 bits. So it has a bigger range, right? So this is a range it normally works with. So of course, you can work with any type of values you have, and any type of characters basically you have. And if you want to define a character variable, it's very simple. You say char, and then you specify the variable name, let's say character, or C equal to whatever character you want to assign. Let's say I want to assign a character which is K. Now in this case, if you want to work with a character, can we use double quotes? Now double quotes is for string, right? For character, we have to use single quote, and you have to put your character into single quote. And remember, it will only accept a single character. And next we have of type Boolean. So if you want to work with Boolean, now Boolean will only accept true or false. Okay, there's no subtypes here, only true or false. Now one thing you have to remember, now in other languages, it may represent it with the help of 1 and 0. In Java, we don't do that. So in Java, it doesn't work with 0 and 1, it is true and false. So it's not like true is 1 and false is 0. It's only true and false. It is normally used for conditions. If you want to check for a condition, based on that, you will do something. That's why we can use true and false. I mean, think about computers. When you say computer can think, it's because of this true or false. Okay. And how do we define a Boolean variable? So it's very simple. You use a keyword called bool, and then you mention a variable name, let's say B is equal to, you either assign true or false. Okay, you don't have to put a single quote or double quote because they are itself keywords. So these are the options we have. Now, if you want to see this in a code, it's very simple. You can just go back here and say, okay, byte is done. Let's create some variables with different type. So int we have already seen, so we'll say num1. This is how you assign integer value. But if you want to go with a byte, so you can say byte b, or we'll say by equal to, now can I assign a value which is 129? You can see it will give you, if I do that, if I go back to my compiler, compile, you can see it will give you error. It says possible lossy conversion from int to byte. So this is int, which is 129. It will, if you try to save that in a byte, it will not work. But what if you say 127? That's the last value you can store. Compile. Okay, there is a problem with result. Let me just remove this section and compile, no issue. Okay, so this is how you save byte value. What if you want to store short? So you can say short sh equal to, and you can assign value which is, let's say 558, any number doesn't matter. And then what if you want to work with long? So long L is equal to. Now when you work with long, remember this thing, after every number for long, you have to put a L at the end to specify that's a long number. The thing we have done with float, we have to put F in the same way long needs L. And what if you can do here with float? So you can say float F is equal to 5.8. Okay, let's try with 5.8 and let's see what happens if you try to compile this. Compile. Okay, you can see it is giving you error. It says again possible logic conversion from double to float, because by default 5.8 is double. If you want to mention hey that's not double, that's float, you can put a F at the end. That should work. You can work with double as well. Double D is equal to 5.8, same value, but this time it is double. And then what else we can work with? We can work with character as well. So we can say char C is equal to, in single quote you can mention a character K. Then we can go for boolean, which is boolean in this case, and you can say B is equal to true. Simple stuff, right? Let's try to compile this. Of course, we are not printing anything, so don't expect anything on the console. Compile, or there's an error. It says cannot find symbol bool. Okay, my bad. It is boolean. The only problem is when you work with multiple languages at the same time, you get confused somewhere. So that's boolean, not bool. So in the notes as well, I need to change it. So I will say this is boolean. Cool. And now let's compile this once again. Compile. Okay, there's no problem. And let's run this. Of course, it will run, but then you will not see any output, right? No output because we're not printing anything. So yeah, that's about this. We have different type of data types we can work with, and all these are inbuilt. Apart from this, we also have some more data types which we'll see later. They're not type of primitive, but this is primitive data types, and this is working. Okay, awesome. So now we know what variables are, what data types are, what a size or range of each data type here, and you don't have to by heart them. You will get used to it. The more practice you do with these variables, you will get used to when to use what. But what if I remove that single quote there? Let's try compile, and you can see we got an error. We can't even put double quotes there. It will give you error as well. And you can see you can't even put double quote. So you have to put single quote because that's what character represents. And the character can be numbered as well. So you can put a character here, which is 8, which is a character itself, right? Digits are also character, no error. Cool. So yeah, that's it from this video.